Hey, this week we are talking to a senior advisor to a member of Congress. We've had Congressman Estes on, and we had Congresswoman Sharice Davids on a video before. Today we're going to talk to someone who has experience staffing members of Congress and doing some other really interesting things. And that's all going to happen this week on Coffee with Chuck. Jeff Kahrs, welcome to Coffee with Chuck.
Thank you, Chuck. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. And I didn't even realize that you were a coffee lover. So I'm learning new things about you every day.
Really? I think you've just forgotten that because, full disclosure, Jeff and I worked together for many years, and I would basically camp out in his office in Washington, D.C. His table became my desk for usually a week, a month for several years. And I probably had some coffee then. I probably spilled it on your table, in fact.
Probably did. And those were fond memories, by the way. I miss those days.
Yeah, those were good times. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But I'd really like to kind of dig back into your past and talk about your career path. I mentioned in the intro that your current title is Senior Advisor to Congressman, 2nd District, Kansas Congressman Jake LaTurner. It's Topeka and so Shawnee County and 24 other counties. Can you tell us a little bit, just describe the district basically, and then, go ahead.
Yeah, glad to. It's a great district. You basically take the complete east side of the state from top to bottom. So you got about a fourth of the state from Nebraska to Oklahoma, except you carve out the greater Kansas City area. And it's 25 counties. It's a rural district, to be sure, but we do have Topeka and of course Lawrence. So we've got two big vibrant communities and a lot of smaller vibrant communities. So it's a wonderful district. It's different, obviously, than the 4th Congressional District when you and I both worked for Congressman Tiahrt, which is now held by Congressman Estes. But it's a great district, and I've enjoyed the opportunity to work for the congressman this last year in a couple months.
And this is for another show, but that district's about to change because of a process called reapportionment and redistricting. We won't go into that, but right now as it stands, that's what the 2nd Congressional District looks like in Kansas. And Jake LaTurner is the congressman for the 2nd District. You've worked for him, as you said, for a little over a year, but you've done many other things prior to this current job. And I know you grew up in the Wichita area. Can you kind of take us back to growing up in Wichita, what you thought you wanted to do, why you selected the career you did, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Great, love to. As Chuck mentioned, I'm a Wichita boy. My entire family is still down in that area. I grew up in an area by College Hill, and I'm a product of the public school system. I went to Elcott Elementary, that's no longer around. I went to Robinson Junior High, which is named after our first governor, and then I went to East High, as did my granddad and my father and all my siblings. So strong heritage with the public school system. And my parents are deceased now, but my siblings are all down there. So very much a Wichita boy. But I've always had an interest in government and frankly politics. I did student government in junior high school. I did it in high school. I did it in college. I even ran for the legislature when I was in college at Wichita State. I'm a proud shocker, and then went on to Washington to get my law degree, by the way. But took a semester off in college and ran for a state legislative seat and had a primary, which I was victorious, and then lost the general. And it was probably the best thing that happened to me, frankly, because I was way too young for me at that time to be whatever I was, 20 or 21 to get elected to the legislature. So it's just kind of all evolved from there. But what I would say is that my grandfather was an attorney, had a firm in Wichita. And I have a twin brother, identical twin brother, who's an attorney, and I have a sister who's an attorney, and then my older brother is a doctor. But Mark and I always knew at an early age that we wanted to pursue law. So it doesn't always happen that way. for kids that they know early on. I would say that most don't at that age, but for whatever reason, Mark and I both knew that we were going to pursue law.
And at that time, so you can do many things with a law degree. So at that time, did you think you were going to be Perry Mason? And none of our students know who Perry Mason is, but
I wouldn't even know what lawyers to use now on TV. But
yeah, me either. I mean, is that what you thought you wanted to do, or how did you see your law degree being used?
Yeah, I mean, initially, I saw my granddad, who was bigger than life, who had this, he literally had his own law firm and a prominent one downtown, and I knew that that's what I wanted to do, and so yeah, I think I wanted to practice law. But I will say that as I got closer to law school, I didn't really think I would pursue law. I mean, practice law, because as Chuck says, there is so much you could do with a law degree, and there are so many lawyers on Capitol Hill that do not practice law. Now, my twin brother and my sister, who are both attorneys, they practice law in the Wichita area, and my sister was a federal prosecutor for a while, and is now practicing law in the private sector. But no, I pretty well knew, especially when I was in law school, that it wasn't something I really wanted to do. But I knew that I wanted to have the law degree. I wanted to have that knowledge. I wanted to have that understanding. And I will say, and I got a great education at Wichita State, but I really learned how to write when I was at law school, and which is such a critical skill for high school students, whatever kids are watching this video. Reading and writing. This is critical. The other stuff that they provide is helpful and can be fun, but reading and writing, those two skills will take you anywhere.
When was it, in whether it was in your undergraduate or during law school, that you were interested in politics and thought that might be a career path you would pursue?
Well, my first job out of law school, let me go back a little bit. So my last semester at Washburn Law School, great law school, by the way. I mean, it's a solid law school here in the Midwest. It was good enough for Bob Dole. You have an opportunity where you could take a class and you got to write a long paper, and you intern for a legislator. And I ended up interning for a young new freshman senator, a guy named Todd Tier, who just got elected. And I didn't even know who he was. I wanted to intern for my state senator, who I went to high school with her boys at East High. She had already had an intern. Then I went to Jerry Moran, who was in the state Senate as a judiciary chairman. He had an intern. And, God had another plan for me, literally. And I, got to go meet Todd, and I interned for him. And I really enjoyed that experience. And so that's probably when it was. And then I enjoyed my writing classes, legal writing classes at Washburn. And so my writing instructors encouraged me, and my grades were decent. I was able to get on law review by God's grace, and encouraged me to apply for judicial clerkships. And so I applied for a couple on the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals, and including the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, an individual named Richard Holmes, who's actually a Wichita boy, probably our last justice that I'm familiar with that came out of Wichita. But anyway, he was our Chief Justice. And I secured that clerkship, which was a great opportunity. And I knew I really loved working in government. And so it really started from there, and probably was never going to look back. I mean, I don't know at the time, I knew then that I was going to spend 30, 40 years in public service. But that's what it's turned out to be.
Tell us just a little bit about what a judicial clerk does. What would you do for the Chief Justice of the Kansas Supreme Court?
Yeah, and let me tell you, I mean, this is a great job because he's the chief, and so he decides the docket. He decides which judges more or less write opinions for which cases, and perhaps even better than that, because he is the Chief Justice and he has a lot of other additional administrative responsibilities, he has a smaller docket. And at least at the time, it's probably changed from now. Judges could have up to 3 clerks, but he only had me. And I lived in the law library at the Kansas Judicial Center, which is on 10th Street, right across the street from the state house, state capitol. And I lived in the library and I wrote opinions, draft opinions. And then the chief would, pick and choose, what he would use for my draft opinions for the cases that he authored. And he was old school. He didn't use a computer. And he didn't, type up opinions. He literally would cut and paste with scissors and tape, and with a long legal pad, with the assistance of his administrative assistant, and he would cut out the parts of my draft opinion that he liked and include it with his. And I'm being very serious. And so it was a great experience, and it was a 2-year clerkship, but it got cut short because the individual that I interned with in the State House, Todd Tehart, decided to run for the U.S. Congress in '94 and got elected, and invited 3 of us to come up to D.C. with him. And so I took that, and the rest is history.
What was that like? So that and this was in 1994. So this was a big change because the Democratic Party had controlled the House at least for 40 years, and the Republicans assumed the majority after that 1994 election. So it was a huge change politically. And at the time, the Speaker of the House was Newt Gingrich, and this class had run on something called the Contract with America. And I forgot there was a 100-day agenda. And so tell us what that experience was like when you first of all, you never worked for a member of Congress, so that was all new, I assume. What was it like to go up to D.C. for a new member of Congress with a new party in control of the House of Representatives?
Yeah.
And then you're trying to get all this stuff done and get moved into an office. What was that like?
Yeah. And before I'll say that, let me just say, when an opportunity comes your way, pray about it, but don't be afraid to jump on it. I remember in May of '94, the election is off. Todd had a primary in August, and then he went on to take on and defeat Dan Glickman in November of '94. And I'm sure very few of your viewers know who that name is, but he was a prominent member of Congress, not just our congressman. He had served for 18 years. He was the chair of the Agriculture Committee. Prominent, well-respected. First of all, not a lot of people predicted the watershed election that it turned out to be, where the Republicans took over. But they certainly didn't. No one saw this one coming, that Dan Glickman was going to fall. Dan Glickman went on to become Agriculture Secretary for President Clinton and do a lot of other things. And he's frankly, he's not my politics, but he's really, frankly, a very wonderful person. But it was heavy stuff, right? For me, it was, moving out of Topeka. My twin brother, Mark, helped me move up there to DC. We kind of had a mutual friend, which was great because it's very expensive to live in that area. And, Hill staffers really don't get paid that much. That's changed a little bit, but not frankly much. But you go up there, you don't go up there for the money. Let's put it that way. You're not serving on Capitol Hill, at least initially, for the money. You're doing it for the love of country, love of job, opportunity. And it was stressful. I mean, it was not only working for a new job and a new member who never served in Congress. We had a very green staff, but on top of that, we were in the majority. He had additional assignments. Even though he was a freshman, we were putting our staff together. It was extremely stressful, and we worked long hours, really for the first 2 years. But those first 100 days, we worked 12 hours a day, and every day of the week we were in the office. I mean, maybe we take Sundays off on occasion, but it was every day we were in the office because there was so much work. But you had adrenaline. You were excited. We were going to change the world, so to speak, and it was a great opportunity, a fun opportunity. And Todd turned out to be, the best boss I've ever had. He's just a great guy and was a great member to work with. And obviously, Chuck, you had the opportunity to work for the congressman as well.
Years later, years later. You were there in the beginning.
A couple of years later.
2001, February 14th, 2001 was my first day on the job.
We've known each other 20 years, right?
What was your role, though? Day one.
So I went up there as what's called a legislative director, and I had no business applying for that job. I didn't apply for it. He just named me as legislative director. But a legislative director, is the person that runs his legislative team. So he's the person that advises the member on committee assignments and makes sure that he's ready for committee hearings. And Todd had 3 committee assignments. He got put on the National Security Committee, which is now called Armed Services. He got placed on the Science Committee, and I think maybe Transportation. I can't remember exactly the other ones. But it's also all the correspondence. That was back in the day when they had snail mail. It's completely different now. And Chuck, let me tell you, it's so much easier. It's all email, and so his correspondence is less. It's limited. It doesn't take as much staff as it did back then, but a lot of work. So it's a full-time job. Plus you're having constituents come up, either individuals or business interests coming up, and you're wanting to meet with them, needing to meet with them, and this is going on all day. And then you've got receptions at night and all the other stuff that goes on at night. So they're long days. It's exhausting work. It doesn't pay much, but it's the best job I ever had.
But then you moved on to get hired as chief of staff after a few years. There was some folks moving on to other things. And so what does the congressman's chief of staff do?
Yeah, so then I went on, became chief. 5 years later, his chief of staff moved on to work at the White House. But well, the chief of staff in some ways is an easier job in the sense that you're basically you've got 3 or 4 top staffers, and you're kind of overseeing the work that they're doing. But the chief of staff, this is what I will say the chief of staff's number one job is, and I say this to my current members' chief of staff. I'm not the chief of staff. I've had that job before. I was glad to have it, and it's a lot. It's a first of all, it's 24/7 job. You're a 24/7 call from the member or whomever. There is no time off as a chief of staff because the member's never off. Especially the member that we worked with, Mr. Kahrs. I mean, he was a full-time, full-on 24/7 member. So you have that, and so that going in. But not only are you overseeing the operations of the DC office, and we had a district office back in Wichita, but you're doing all the political stuff, off hours, out of the government buildings as well, which is fundraising, and just all the other politics that kind of go along with it. So you're overseeing staff, you're maintaining great, important relationships on the Hill with other members' offices and their senior staff, with leadership staff. In case working for Kahrs, he got on a top committee his second term on the Appropriations Committee. He became an assistant whip on the whip team, and then a deputy whip. And that's the group of individuals that basically make sure that the Republican conference have the votes lined up for legislation on the floor. So, and he did a lot of other stuff. Todd was very active. So there was a lot going on all the time.
So you were there, how many years did you
serve? I worked for Todd and served on the Hill for 16 years, then was off for 10 years, and then had this wonderful opportunity to go work for another freshman congressman, a lot like Todd, very sharp, very motivated, very active, and also frankly fun, and a fun guy to work with.
And that's Congressman LaTurner now.
Yeah.
The 16 years you worked for Congressman Kahrs, can you remember a couple of things that you were able to do as a staff person? The congressman, we see the Congress people going to White House gatherings and important things. Staff plays a significant role in the accomplishments of Congress, vital to the process. Can you think of some things that you remember that were kind of at the top of the list of things you look back on and say, yeah, wow, I was part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And we were fortunate. We had a great staff, and we were able to get good Kansans. It's hard to get folks from Kansas to go up to DC. There's a sacrifice for money and whatnot. But we were fortunate to be able to get some good folks from Kansas on the DC staff. Obviously, our Wichita staff were all the people from Wichita, and the area. But as I mentioned earlier, Todd served on the Appropriations Committee, and it's the committee that funds the government. I mean, basically the budget, which is this last one that just passed was about 1.5 trillion. So I won't waste time on discretionary, non-discretionary, but basically all the budgets that have to be funded year in and year out, like the Defense Department and Health and Human Services and the Education Department. It doesn't deal with all the stuff like Social Security and whatnot, but it's stuff that has to be funded every year or there's no government. The government closes down, which we've had shutdowns. Great committee, powerful committee, great opportunity to do stuff. And a couple that stand out. This is not directly related to appropriations, but we had constituents that were missionaries in the Philippines, Martin and Gracia Burnham. And they were on like a honeymoon anniversary, and they were kidnapped by Muslim terrorists, Abu Safai, who were in the business of kidnapping, especially Americans, for money. And they were held in captivity for a year. And Todd did everything he could in his ability to try to secure their release, or to get our military, United States military, more engaged for a rescue mission. And that involved, Todd had meetings with President Bush. Todd had meetings with Condoleezza Rice. Todd had phone calls with Condoleezza Rice. Todd had phone calls with the president. And at one point, he decided that he wanted to go over there and see what he could do directly. So I had an opportunity to go over there with him to the Philippines. This was in 2001, 2002. Anyway, and we went over there, and I remember on New Year's Eve, we had dinner at the presidential palace with the president of the Philippines, a wonderful woman. And then they took us over to the portion of the Philippines where they were being held hostage. And we did what we could do. I mean, the Philippine government simply did not want to use our military in an armed situation. They were happy to take our advice and our counsel and training, but they did not want to do that. Eventually, the Philippine government located where they're being held hostage. There was a shootout. Martin was shot and killed, and Gracia was freed. So it was a sad, tragic ending. But they were over there doing the Lord's business. They knew what they were doing. They knew what the possibilities were as well. And, Martin's in a much better place now. And it was a great experience. I got to meet these amazing people, and I could talk about it for hours. But yeah, I mean, I had an opportunity to have dinner with the president of the Philippines in the Philippine Palace. I mean, it was amazing.
Well, one of the things that I remember about that time, Gracia obviously got back and wrote a book. And while you may not have thought at the time when you were flying over that area, you mentioned this, where they were being held, they saw the plane, and their captors, I believe, said something about, "That's your congressman," or something to that effect. And it gave them hope. They knew that someone, I mean, I'm sure they knew people were praying for them, but they knew that one of their government leaders cared enough to go to the Philippines.
Yeah. That's Todd. We had the Department of Defense gave us a military attaché. I believe it was a Marine, sharp guy who was very helpful. And of course, our State Department set up other various meetings while we were over there. And let me just tell you that Manila is very loud on New Year's Eve night. I mean, you would think that that their capital city was under siege or something. It was so loud and smoke filled outside as people were celebrating the New Year. But it was a great experience. It was an honor to meet Gracia, an honor to meet Martin's parents. I mean, they were just salt and light. And in my opinion, Martin was a martyr and is in heaven now. For those of us that are Christians, there's not a higher honor than to be a martyr for Jesus Christ. But it was a tragic ending, but Gracia got back, was able to raise their children.
Yeah. So you left he ran for Senate. That didn't work out. You left Washington and came back to Kansas in a role with the state government. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about that, and then what that led to for further federal service with HHS? Yeah,
and I'll be quick because I talk too much. So I had a great opportunity in 2010 when Todd was unsuccessful in his bid for the Senate to come back for former Senator Brownback, then Governor Brownback. I had no idea where I was going to work within his administration, and on day one, I found out I was going to SRS, which was basically the social services agency for the state that oversees welfare programs, foster care, and whatnot. And wasn't I have to admit I wasn't very excited about that. I didn't know really where I was going to land, but I just didn't know that I wanted to land there. But it turned out to be a wonderful 7-year experience. I was hired to be the general counsel, but within a week, the secretary made me his chief of staff and helped me kind of assemble a new staff for him. And then we went about reforming an agency that frankly probably hadn't been touched in 40 years. And we did great reforms on foster care, and more is needed. But we passed landmark welfare reform legislation that is still law to this day, and that other states have followed in suit. And so when President Trump got elected president, Governor Brownback asked me to pursue the regional administrator, it's called regional director position for Health and Human Services in Region 7, a position that oversees operations for HHS for 4 states, Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, and Iowa. And so with the help with Governor Brownback and Senator Roberts and others, I was able to get that appointment and did that for 3 years. And of course, that was an amazing experience, get to work with all the state governments, healthcare providers throughout the 4 states. And of course, our last year was all about COVID. And it was a 24/7 job, especially that last year. Great experience. I loved working with the men and women at HHS in Kansas City.
And then you came back and Congressman LaTurner wanted someone experienced, someone who knew the area. And then you've been doing this job. I'm curious, what advice would you give a young person who thinks they want to get involved in either politics or government, specifically with a congressman, member of Congress? What advice would you give that person? How do you get your start in that?
Amen. Glad to answer that. And I'll try to be quick, Chuck. Well, first of all, it's very competitive. So you don't need a college degree with every job in America. And, frankly, only 31% of Americans will end up getting a 4-year college degree. So a large majority do not, and many are doing well, have wonderful careers, making the money that they need to provide for them and their family. But if you want to get a job on Capitol Hill, it's going to be very challenging if you don't have a college degree, to be honest with you. Also, and this applies regardless of what you're going to do. Keep clean, right? Stay away from drugs. I personally recommend stay away from alcohol. Alcohol could be a lot of traps for you. And so I would say that, go get your college degree. You can volunteer locally with your political party of your choice, whether you're Republican or Democrat, but there's plenty of opportunity. And, you can be an intern for your congressman. Congress people are always looking for interns. They probably think, oh, I'll never get it because they're probably already filled up. It's just not true. We're always looking for interns in our Topeka office, and I'm sure that the other offices are looking for interns as well once you get out of high school and you're in college. So that's a great opportunity for you to find out if that's something you like or not. But let me just say one last thing before you send me away, Chuck. I want to mention something that's called the success sequence, and this has been around since President Carter. And it came out of his administration. So this is not a Democrat or Republican thing. This is just the truth. And there's a thing called the success sequence. If you do these 4 things and you do them, this is the important part, in this order, you have a 97% chance of never ending up in poverty. Now you need to stay away from drugs, okay? Because that's a loser. But if you get your high school degree or your diploma, and then you get a job, and then you get married, and then you have kids, when you get those things out of order, or if you don't do all those things, like if you don't get your high school diploma, then your chances of ending in poverty are substantially higher. So get your high school diploma or degree, and if you go to college, great. Or if you want to go to military, which I think, frankly, in my opinion, is an equally advantageous route to take. I think it's just as advantageous as going to college, in my humble opinion. And this is someone with a law degree. And get married and then have kids. If you do those things in that order, you're not going to be in poverty. You're going to be able to provide for your household and your family and do the things that you want to do, which we're allowed to do in this great country called America. So that's my commercial.
Great. Well, we've definitely heard of the success sequence. That is difficult to say quickly. And the data is the data. So thank you for bringing
Right.
that up.
Yeah.
Jeff Kahrs, thank you for joining us this week. I'm sure we've learned a lot. It was good kind of remembering some of the fun times and maybe even the challenging times. But we really appreciate your time and imparting some of your words of wisdom.
I appreciate that. God bless you and God bless your viewers. Thanks a bunch, Chuck.
Thanks for watching Coffee with Chuck. Please subscribe below, and you may want to check out the video that's attached.